Sci-fi, horror, fantasy, absurdism in the extreme. It's all available here in the Tales from the Omni Vault book series. Check the description for Amazon links so you can get your copies and start reading today. Thank you all, and now, on to the video. Hello ladies and gentlemen, I'm the Omni Viewer, and if you thought Yongari was the only cheesy monster from the 60s that got an unlikely reboot decades later, then have I got a treat for you. Treat being a relative term, yes? Well, you never know what some people might be into, Snazzy. But as we move forward, remember, don't you worry if you can't dance. Let the music move your feet. Come on and shake your body as we look at Konga. Somebody was going to say it. So, everybody knows King Kong. The 1933 original is one of the only genre pictures that stuffed shirts acknowledge as great cinema, which it certainly deserves. Being so popular, it's no surprise that Kong wound up spawning a multitude of imitators, given that giant gorillas, or ground sloths that look suspiciously like gorillas, have been a staple of fantastical cinema ever since. Yet among all these anthropoid also-rans, Konga somehow managed to stand out. And today, we're going to see if we can find out why. The movie opens with a bang. Well, that's one way to get people's attention, but perhaps some context should be added. You see, one Dr. Charles Decker was aboard that plane as it flew over Africa, and he was presumed dead, reasonably so. 1 year later, though, he returns to London alive and well, bringing with him an assortment of plants previously unknown to Western science, and a little chimpanzee named Konga. Decker is convinced that the plants he found, which were introduced to him by the tribe who took him in, will revolutionize the world. His plants are specifically carnivorous in nature, and he believes that they can help him bridge the gap between plant and animal. Some even contain elements with the potential for growth and mind control, and Konga will be his test subject. Something isn't quite right about Decker, though, and when he meets opposition and competition, Konga becomes not just his test subject, but the instrument of his wrath. Although usually categorized as a giant monster movie, that only really applies to the finale. For most of its runtime, Konga is actually more comparable to Frankenstein than King Kong. Charles Decker is undeniably the focal point of the movie, with Michael Gough striking all the right notes in his performance. Decker seems at first like a good guy, respected by the press, admired by his students, and adored by his assistant Margaret, but it quickly becomes apparent that he's a bit unstable. Life seems disposable to him, especially if it stands in the way of what he wants, and so he commands Konga to kill anyone he declares his foe. Combine that with the creepy attention he gives one of his much younger students, and you have a memorable villain protagonist, though not necessarily a perfect one. You mean to imply that something is missing? Yes, because something clearly is. Like I said, we can infer that Decker used to be seen as a good guy with a good reputation, but he's become cruel, manipulative, and violent since returning from Africa. The thing is, we don't really know what caused this change. It must be a change, though, because it's difficult to fathom how Decker can be this wicked and still well-liked by everyone he knows. But the thing that pushes him over the edge is never specified. That being said, Decker is still a fascinating villain to follow, the sort we ultimately want to see get his comeuppance by the end, which he does. As for our eponymous monster, Konga certainly has the camp factor down in spades. Obviously, people are going to notice the ridiculous aspects right off, like how the injections of Decker's plant formula turn him from a chimpanzee into a gorilla. That's not just an aesthetic discrepancy. Hairs left at the scene where Konga attacks people are identified as gorilla hairs, so he changes species in the movie without explanation. The suit is also straddling the line between not looking too cheap, but still looking cheap enough. The choice to leave actor Paul Stockman's eyes visible is another aspect that straddles the line. On the one hand, it allows him more freedom to perform, but on the other hand, it draws attention to the fact that the monster is a guy in a monkey suit. Even the other special effects around this ape waver between good and bad. Some shots of Konga's stroll through London, and it is more of a stroll than a rampage, look really good, with some shots seamlessly blending together in ways even modern movies can't achieve. Other times it feels like the effects crew didn't care. Like when the army is shooting at him near Big Ben, look at how many shots just miss entirely. By the end it feels less like Konga dies of his wounds and more like he just randomly has a heart attack. As campy as the depiction is, though, you can't help but feel sorry for Konga by the end. Despite being the tool of Decker's murderous will, Konga is ultimately a victim in his own right. He's taken from his home to become a lab rat, mutated into something monstrous with no will of his own, dazed and confused as he grows out of control and gunned down in cold blood. Indeed, despite claiming to care for him, Decker reveals that he's willing to destroy Konga himself so long as he still has his formula and notes. Much like the eighth wonder of the world, Konga is a tragic figure, and that tragedy really comes forward in the movie. Perhaps that's why he managed to stand out among all the other copycats. Or copy apes. You know what I mean. Fun fact, footage from Konga appears in the music video for AC/DC's Hail Caesar. Why? Who cares? So there is a reason why Konga is remembered. There is some good quality in here, but there are also a lot of strange elements that elevate this movie to a cult classic. Speaking of strange, though, you might not be ready for what comes next. As it turns out, Konga has something in common with that other giant monster that rampaged across London in the 60s. Konga and Gorgo headlined their own respective comic book series printed by Charlton Comics, and both comics fell into the public domain even though the movies did not. I guess DC just wasn't interested in them. What that means is, technically, anybody can use the character of Konga as long as you make it explicitly clear that the version you're using is from the comic book. And that is why Konga TNT exists. Okay, so this time around, a spaceship crashes on a lost island peopled by Amazons, and their queen wears a piece of it as a medallion. After a pervy adventurer awkwardly seduces her into removing it, he brings it back to Canada so it can be used in strange experiments of mad science. The only successful test subject is a monkey who escapes during a raid by terrorists, and he winds up in the care of two little boys who've been looking for a pet. They name him Konga, and obviously they aren't prepared for when he sprouts to gargantuan proportions. Oh my. Omni, that footage looks abysmal. I agree, Snazzy, it certainly does. And yet I find myself at a bit of a loss. Look, I get that this is an indie project that was apparently made during the lockdowns, and there's one train of thought that says I should go a bit easier on it than I would a big studio picture. On the other hand, though, it was still deemed worthy of showing to the world and is thus open to scrutiny. Moreover, SRS Cinema is charging money for the DVD, and I feel that if I'm going to pay for something, I have at the very least earned the right to say if I feel my money was well spent. This time around, though, things are a bit confusing, and you're about to find out why. Okay, it's obvious that this movie was made on a budget so small that calling it shoestring would be generous. As a result, the effects are terrible, no question about it. Little Konga is depicted with a simple hand puppet that isn't even always being operated, and large Konga is a dude in a Halloween costume. Any CGI looks less realistic than your average cartoon, and the blue screen is always obvious. The performances are equally unconvincing, and when everything is put together, the result falls far short of the standard set by the first movie. Yes, I mean that. Here's the thing I didn't expect, though. Konga TNT is a comedy. It's not apparent from the first scene, but as the plot picks up, it becomes obvious that the movie has its tongue firmly planted in its cheek. Wordplay and sight gags dominate the human side of the plot, and yes, there's even a fart joke. Knowing this, I'm no longer sure how to analyze Konga TNT because I can't tell how much of it is intentionally bad. A moment ago I mentioned the performances being unconvincing, but now I must ask, are they like that because the cast can't act or because they were told to act like they're in a bad monster movie? Are the effects cheap because they really couldn't do better, or because they're satirizing movies with bad effects? In short, you can't tell if this is a failed attempt at good filmmaking or a successful attempt at bad filmmaking. Yes? Pretty much, and it's not like I usually don't know the difference. I've seen The Lost Skeleton of Cadavra, so I know what it looks like when filmmakers are intentionally trying to ape Ed Wood. Here, though, I'm just not sure. Maybe it's too Canadian for our American minds to make sense of, eh? I knew I should have drunk more maple syrup before watching it. Give me a minute. Sweet. Okay, I think I figured it out. Whether you view Konga TNT as bad or so bad it's good, it's an example of what can be done when a character exists in the public domain. Maybe some of you have seen this movie and thought you could do better. Thanks to the public domain, you can. These guys took a shot, so why can't you? Who's gonna stop you? That sounds like a good note to end things on. Agreed. Once again, it seems we have a monster legacy that was unexpected in every conceivable way. Much like Yongari, Konga is something that you wouldn't expect to be a cult classic, certainly not one that would get a remake. Yet the original has risen above other giant gorilla movies, and the sequel is a thing that exists. Will the sequel become a cult classic on the same level as the original? That I can't tell you. Perhaps it's up to you guys to decide. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni viewer signing off. I do wonder if Konga TNT is better or worse than that Reptosaurus movie the Sci-Fi Channel made. Although the only way to find out is to watch the Reptosaurus movie, and I don't know if I'm ready for that.